What's going on, everyone? Foxxy here with yet another obscure first-person shooter I'm sure most of you have never heard of. The title is called Legendary. It was released back in November of 2008 for the PC, Xbox 360, and PS3 by a developer called Spark Unlimited. Does that company ring a bell to anyone? If it doesn't, don't worry, because they've only made 5 games before the company went under back in 2015. Those 5 games being Turning Point Fall of Liberty, Lost Planet 3, Call of Duty Finest Hour, Yaiba, Ninja Gaiden Z, and of course, the game I'm reviewing today, Legendary. Now, let's just let that sink in for a second. The developers who created Call of Duty Finest Hour, which was generally a well-liked game, also created Yaiba, a game that many have ranked to be one of the worst they've ever played. But what does that mean for Legendary? Well, based off the Metacritic 50% score, I'm not expecting much. But let's keep in mind, I have loved games with really low scores and have hated games with really high scores. So let's try to go into this with as much of an open mind as we possibly can and start this damn review already. As with most of my reviews, we start off with the story. Well, you pretty much have to pay attention to everything going on, as well as reading the messages on your PDA thing, otherwise you'll be kinda out of the loop. Anyway, the game starts out with you being hired by a guy named LaFay to open up Pandora's box and retrieve the contents inside. When you open the box, your hand gets trapped inside and is stabbed by a glowing magical blade that, for whatever reason, somehow gives you magical abilities. And because you opened Pandora's box, you released thousands and thousands of mythological creatures that are now causing massive destruction to the world. Not only do you have to fight these creatures, but you also have to defend yourself from LaFay's soldiers who are now out to get you as well.
Alright, spread out! Find Deckard! Shoot to kill!
The story itself would have been really well done, but the problem I have with it is that it's too complicated for what it needs to be. There are a lot of moments where I kept asking myself, why is this happening? Some of which I never got answers for. The campaign will probably take you anywhere from 3 to 5 hours depending on your playstyle, so it's kind of a short game. Then again, most linear shooters often are. Either way, this is going to be one of those games you should be able to complete in a day or two if you have nothing better to do or, play. Graphically, for 2008, while it's not the prettiest game for its time, it still looks really, really good. The color design is a little monotone, however, that's probably due to the setting of the game, so I can't really knock them for that. However, I will knock them on the fact that this game suffers from serious frame rate issues, not only during the gameplay, but in the cutscenes as well.
Clear all power couplings. Prepare to initialize system. Engaging phased startup sequence.
If it happened every once in a while, I wouldn't be so annoyed by it, but the frames drop on somewhat of a regular basis. The overall atmosphere of the game, especially at the beginning where the buildings are all crumbling down right in front of your eyes, is just amazing. Another big positive is the modeling on the creatures. They look absolutely wonderful. The shadowing, detailing, everything about them looks great, and they even have a creepy look to them, which is always a plus. However, the character models are kinda lacking. Especially the main character, who reminds me of the stock creator wrestler in those WWE games. There's nothing interesting about him as a character, or the way he looks. I like the music in this game, and the sound effects are alright, nothing worth complaining about, however the acting is not very good. To be honest, the voice work done on the creatures is fine, and some of the actors do a decent job, but there are some of the characters in the game, usually the useless NPCs that get killed shortly after you meet them, clearly have never done voice work before. Oh, and there's one more tiny little thing. Now, some of you are going to call me nitpicky, but the audio effect that they used when people are talking to you on whatever phone or communicator you're using is just dreadful. I complained about the same sort of thing in my Secret Service review, but this is way worse. Just take a listen for yourself.
Everybody look alive. The boss is online.
All units, listen up. This is Lexington. Pandora's box has been intercepted by a giant creature. Some kind of golem. The thing forms by absorbing wreckage from its surroundings using a high-energy magnetic field. Unfortunately, it's absorbed Pandora's box.
The controls are decent at best. Aiming around is kind of fidgety and cumbersome, although compared to the other trash I've played, the controls on this are actually tolerable once you get used to them. The gameplay is sadly not that good. There's not much to the gameplay other than pointing and shooting. No real strategy is needed or anything like that. It sort of plays like a mindless arcade shooter, which isn't a terrible thing because there are plenty of mindless shooters that are actually really fun to play. This is not one of them. I think part of the reason has to deal with the creatures. While they are cool and all, they don't seem to pose much of a threat compared to armed soldiers. Most of the creatures you can just simply strafe around them while shooting and maybe take a hit or two, as opposed to the soldiers where you actually need to take cover from fire and pick enemies off one by one. It doesn't help that this game is very much a linear corridor type shooter. Well, to be fair, the linear part isn't the issue. I love linear shooters more than open world ones, to be honest. But when you're stuck in these tight spaces, narrow hallways, sewers, and fucking air vents all the time, it gets really old really quick. I mean, there are areas where you'll be in the open fighting the enemy, but it happens like, I don't know, 20 to 25% of the game. Let's be serious here. The gameplay and level design are both so boring that once you've played the first 2 or 3 levels, you've played the entire game all the way through. There's nothing that happens later on in the game that's any different other than seeing maybe a few new creatures, and that's it. The interesting thing to me is that compared to some of the other obscure, terrible, or even low-budget shooters I've played, this one has probably the best enemy AI I've seen so far. At least with the enemy soldiers. Not that the AI on the creatures are terrible, it's just that they're way too easy to manipulate and kill. Oh, and if you haven't already noticed, the hit detection is not that good. It's not so obvious on the creatures, but with the humans you can tell immediately that something is off. And the other issue I have with the combat is the whole magical abilities thing. In my opinion, it actually takes away from the gameplay because you only get 2 abilities. Healing and that pulse stun attack. When the game first started, I was kinda under the impression that during the course of the story you'll be learning or unlocking new moves or abilities, anything at all, like most games would do in this sort of situation. But no, this is all you get. It's very underwhelming and makes me question why they even bothered in the first place. There are barely any weapons in the game, maybe like 7 or 8 total, which by itself isn't a terrible thing, but you'd figure a game like this would have much more creative weaponry, or at least more magical-based attacks. But no, I mean, the most creative thing you have is a flamethrower, and I don't consider that to be creative at all. You could argue that the flamethrower is a creative and unique weapon, but it's really not when you think about it. The Eastern Roman Empire were the first ones that I'm aware of who created and used this sort of weapon, which was called Greek fire back in the year 672. But maybe I'm looking way too into this. I don't know, but I'll tell you this, I'm going to wrap up this damn review before I go insane. Would I recommend Legendary the video game? No, not at all. I mean, even though the concept is really cool and interesting, the game as a whole is hovering in between mediocre and just flat out bad. If another developer like, I don't know, Bethesda, 2K, maybe even Activision were the ones behind this, then maybe they could have created something really special. But what we have is a unmemorable, boring game that is lacking in almost every single category. I guess if you really like the concept of this game, then by all means go ahead and give it a shot. if you can still find it, it's about $2 at GameStop, so it's not like you'll be breaking the bank if you end up not liking it. Now, you could say I'm being harsh with this review. I disagree 100%. You see, I would much rather play an ungodly bad, hilariously bad, or even an amazing game, because not only will I most likely be more entertained, but there's also a much higher chance I'll remember the game. Oh, and by chance you do decide to buy this on PS3, do yourself a favor and sign out of PSN before you play this game. For whatever reason, if you are connected to PSN, the game does not recognize the user and won't allow you to load your saves or start off from anywhere other than the very beginning of the game. I assume the reason for this has something to do with the company going under, but I honestly have no idea. Either way, that's the end of this review, everyone. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and if you do have a suggestion for a game you want me to look at, leave it in the comments below, and I'll debate whether or not I'm going to review it at some point. Anyway, till next time, everyone, take care of yourselves.